The word adversity usually brings with it a negative connotation. This week, Marcus Aurelius Anderson shows us how adversity is actually a gift. It's something that we can lean into, learn from it, and help it improve our lives and become better from it. This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast. Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I am your host, Scott Valcourtson. This week's guest is Marcus Aurelius Anderson. He is a proud veteran, a best-selling author of The Gift of Adversity, a TEDx speaker. He's also an international keynote speaker, a mindset coach to leaders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs, a lifelong martial artist, as well as the creator of the Acta Non Verba movement. He also hosts his own podcast. And the crazy thing is, as impressive as that background is, that doesn't even begin to tell his story. Welcome to the show, Marcus. How are you doing today?
I'm amazing. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you.
I really appreciate you taking the time. As I was telling you before we went on, I heard you on a couple other podcasts. I've listened to some of your podcasts, and your story is unbelievable, And so I guess maybe we can just start there with your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. How far back do you want to start?
Well, I know you joined the military when you were 38.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start a little bit before that, kind of what led up into why does anybody join the military at 38?
Yeah. When I was in infantry school, the drill sergeant asked me, he's like, did you lose a bet with God? And I was like, I don't know. That remains to be seen. So to give everybody sort of that background, like Scott was alluding to, at 38 years old, at that time I was in chiropractic school in Atlanta, Georgia. I was married and I was kind of killing myself trying to work as a bartender, a lot of hours. And then I was also taking about 25 hours of doctorate level courses in chiropractic school, which is a lot. So I was getting about 3 or 4 hours of sleep. That was the regular. And I was married at the time. And the big takeaway for that I want people to know is this. My marriage fell apart. And to me, as a man, we always think that if we're able to provide whatever our vocation is, that is sort of a definition of who we are. And in my mind, I'm going to school, killing myself, taking out less loans so that I can bartend, so that I can actually have more money. And in my mind, I'm doing that for my wife and I so that we can have this future together. And looking forward is very important. However, I did not spend time on the relationship the way that I should. I didn't pour into her the way that I should have. And so at 38 years old, I'm getting divorced. And I don't understand why it's happening. Now, in hindsight, I can see it. But at the time, it was like, this doesn't make any sense. As that's happening, about 2 weeks after that, my great uncle, who was my biggest male role model, passed away. My great uncle was Ronald J. Pitts. He was a Vietnam veteran. He was a Green Beret. He was in long-range reconnaissance patrols back then in Vietnam. So these are the guys that it was him. He led a team. They would drop them off behind enemy lines, and their job was to go out and find the enemy, mark out routes, take out targets of opportunity, and then if they're given additional objectives, and they take them as they go. So he and my father are the ones that taught me about firearms, the importance of knowing where your target is, what's behind your target, understanding that if you point a weapon at this, whatever this is, you're willing to destroy whatever that is. So he passed away. So in my life, that was a big 1-2 punch. And I was the pallbearer for him. And I did pretty well during the actual parts where they were just kind of talking about him. And it was a full regalia, full bird colonel gave up and eulogized him and everything. And then when they played taps, I just fell apart. They folded the flag in the triangle and they right face and they give it to my great aunt, who I'm sitting next to, and they say, thank you for your sacrifice. We're sorry for your loss. And I just lose it. And so it takes something big in life to really slap you in the face. We all are sort of asleep. And I always say that it takes adversity to slap us from the slumber of mediocrity to really look and see what the hell is important to us. And we don't know what we want often until we no longer have it. So for me, being in this position where my marriage is falling apart, I'm 38, and I'd always wanted to join the military, but I always had a reason not to. And so that week I go and talk to a recruiter and I say, okay, what's the age limit? Can I get in? What does this look like? At that time, this is 2010 rather, the age limit was 35. And he asked me how old I was. I said 38. And I go to turn and leave. And the recruiter's like, well, come back and talk to me. And I was like, with all due respect, if this is not going to work, don't waste my time. He asked me what my motivation was to join. I told him what had happened. And I had a degree at that time, obviously. And he's like, so you could come in and you have a degree. You could go to OCS, Officer Candidate School. And when in the Army, you can, have whatever job you want if you're qualified with your test scores. Well, I maxed out my PT test, and then I took an ASVAB there. So taking doctorate level courses and then taking the ASVAB, I was off the charts on that. He's like, I can give you pretty much anything that you want. I was like, don't worry, I got to figure it out. I want to be in the infantry. And he starts laughing. He's like, you don't get it. He's like, you can do anything you want. And I said, you don't get it. This is what I want. If I don't get this, I'm out the door. And he tried to talk some sense into me. And again, Officer Candidate School, he says, okay, so you go to infantry and then you can potentially go to Officer Candidate School. He said, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a candidate. You're not going to be an officer necessarily in the infantry. It's the most competitive MOS out there for an officer. I said, okay, what if I was enlisted? He's like, you want to go into the military enlisted in the infantry at 38 years old? I was like, yeah. I said, would that guarantee that I would have the opportunity to go to Ranger School, potentially drop a special forces packet, all these things? He's like, yeah, I mean, of all that, that's your best likelihood. I was like, let's do it. And we went back and forth for probably half an hour. And finally, he just sighed and slid the paper over and signed it. And he's like, hey, man, it's your life. And 6 months later, I'm at Fort Benning getting yelled at by guys in brown hats, half my age, competing against guys that are 20 years old. But it's what I needed. When we're in it and we're committed 100%, I say that adversity gives us no other choice. And when there's no other choice, the choice is simple. So I'm there. I'm in it. It's the first 2 weeks of Hell Week. Yeah, you better be present. You better push. You better expect a lot from yourself. And that's where I was.
Did they, knowing that you were older or, like you said, twice the age of many of those guys, did they try to make it even harder on you to see if you could hold up?
Initially they did, yeah, because they want to break you early. If you're not going to make it, they want to break you early. But after the first 2 weeks, when younger guys were breaking and falling apart, because the advantage that I had was I had life experience. I had a strong mind. So if you're a 19-year-old kid who's never been away from a cell phone or mom and dad ever, and all of a sudden you're put into a infantry school, and that was back when infantry school was still pretty challenging, let's say, that was something that was overwhelming for them. My biggest worry was that my body wouldn't hold out. But after younger guys are like breaking their ankles or their shoulders, or they're, actually getting like stress fractures from like the amount of weight that we have to carry because they're not prepared, that's when they were like, okay, this old guy is fine. We need to look at these younger guys who are going to fall apart at the seams in the face of adversity. And so that's what my advantage was. And then once I believed that I was okay, after the first couple of weeks, and it was like, okay, this is just a game. Yeah, there's not going to be a lot of sleep. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of bullshit attached to it, but that's part of it. Right?
So fast forward to, as you're going through that training, is that when you eventually ended up suffering the injury that you didn't even know?
So I went through infantry school and all the advanced individualized training, and then I went to my unit at 10th Mountain in upstate New York. And then about a year after that, because as soon as I get there, at that time, 10th Mountain was the most deployed unit in the history of the military. So they were going on their own deployments. They were attaching to other people. They were supporting Rangers, supporting Special Forces, supporting Delta, supporting whomever needed support. So we're there, and as soon as I get there, they were like, hey, get ready to pack your trash. We're going to be going soon. So as soon as I hit there, like I'm hitting the ground directly into a deployment like we're training to lead up to it. And it's intense. Like I thought that infantry school was intense. And then once I got there and I'm training with guys that have deployed multiple times and they're pushing you and they're demanding more of you, that was when I was like, wow, there's a lot more to this. about a year after that is when I got injured. I ruptured a disc in my neck, and there's different levels of injury, obviously, but for me, it was to the point where it was so bad that it actually compressed my spinal cord and it paralyzed me from the neck down. So I literally tried to roll out of bed one morning and my neck will sort of move, but the rest of my body won't articulate. So back to the chiropractic school, in my mind, I was like, oh, I actually sort of giggled. I was like, oh, the old man's sore. I was sort of laughing to myself because we were training a lot that week. And then I'm listening to my chiropractic mind that's like, well, do a body scan, see where you're at. And this is either something that's going to right itself quickly, or this is a serious neurological impediment. And it became pretty obvious that it was something that was pretty serious. They knocked on my door because they were looking for an AAR from the training that we had done earlier that week. And I'm like yelling through the door, I can't move. And I'm not really the kind of guy to, joke around with that kind of stuff. And so they, break in, they get me and rush me to the hospital, get an MRI, disc is ruptured. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I hope this doesn't take very long because we're getting ready to deploy. I've just been given my own team.
Did you feel this coming on at all? Or do you remember when you injured it?
So there was no specific method of onset, but that whole week leading up to it, we had done a 50% ruck. So that means you take 50% of your body weight, you put that in your rucksack. And we had done a 10-mile walk. It actually was a run, like a little jog or ruck run is what we called them. And all week, I had numbness in my hands and my feet. But this is in upstate New York. It's in February. This is 20 miles south of the Canadian border. Like negative 20 degrees is the norm. And as infantrymen, we're always out in it. So I just assumed, oh, my hands and feet are cold because we've just been in the field for 2 weeks. I come back, it'll get better. But then eventually trying to hold on to the pull-up bar, I've got a pretty strong grip. And all of a sudden I couldn't hold on to the bar anymore. Or during the runs, my legs would move, but it's like I had to just slam my heels into the ground because I couldn't actually feel and articulate. And then by that Friday, I was at the point where I couldn't even tie my boots. Or it took me about 10 minutes to tie my boots, which is normally, as a soldier, that's like a everyday occurrence. And it looked like my boots had been tied by a drunk 4-year-old. And when I was trying to walk to formation, like literally I'm moving my legs like big overstuffed potato sacks to move them there. And I kept thinking, well, if I could just get some sleep and recover, I think I'll be fine. And that's when I woke up like that. So there was no specific method, but again, all that compression, jumping out of, helicopters, all these things that will compress all that. And so they take me to the hospital. They're like, we're going to prep you to be operated on. Again, I'm hoping that I don't need to be operated on, but that's the reality. It was to the point where my diaphragm wasn't articulating, so I couldn't breathe. And the nurse is like, listen, the reason why you're having a hard time breathing is because you're going to slowly just suffocate from this thing. So they prep me. I go down there. I put on the mask. I count from 100 down to about 98. I find out later that I flatlined on the table twice. They didn't think they were going to get me back. So waking up in the ICU and wondering, am I AWOL? Was that all a bad dream? Now I'm in a neck brace at that point. So what little movement I had was completely arrested and I'm still paralyzed. And then about 3 weeks later was my 40th birthday. So I'm celebrating my 40th birthday in a bed, broke, divorced, paralyzed, wondering what the hell do I do with my life now, if this is the truth.
And what are the doctors telling you as far as like prognosis towards regaining some movement, or are they telling you this is unfortunately just the way it's going to be from here on out?
Yeah, the doctor was very complimentary at first because he was like, hey man, you get the second chance at life. The good news is you get to live to tell the tale. He's like, the bad news is this is what you're left with. And it would be irresponsible for me to tell you anything differently. So for me, that was a big slap to wake me up, so to speak. And again, as a soldier, in my mind, this doctor's just told me that I've overcome death. So I'm like, well, if I've overcome that, I can probably, beat this whole walking thing, right? And I was in denial for the first week because that's of the 5 stages of like acceptance. It's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. For me, that first week, I was like, well, maybe tomorrow I'll be better. And maybe tomorrow I'll be better. But then when they bring me back and they put me in my unit, and they put me in the warrior transition unit, and I'm just kind of sitting there every day, not able to move, just sitting with this reality, that's when I became very angry. And I was angry at the people around me. I was projecting my anger, but the person I was the most mad at was myself. Because I thought about every time in my life when I had hesitated, when I had put things off until tomorrow, when I was like, oh, I got plenty of time to do that. So everybody that's listening here, I want you to understand, there will eventually come a time in your life when you will no longer be able to chase after the things that mean the most to you. And that time is approaching much closer than you think. So if it's important to you and you want to do it, go do it now. Don't wait. Don't ask for permission. Listen, and you will never get permission to do anything or validation until you no longer need it. If it's important to you, go do it now. Figure it out. Everybody that's in business or doing anything, they want to have the perfect plan established for them, and they want it to be step by step, and they want to know everything. But you will never know every step, just like in combat, just like in shooting, right? No plan actually survives the first contact. So we have an idea, we have a direction of where we want to go. But for most people, the answer that they seek so desperately is found in the adversity that they are currently avoiding.
And I've had that presented to me by a coach one time. He calls it the myth of one day.
Yep.
And he said, we're always looking like, once we have this, we'll do this, or, X amount of money in the bank account, or whatever it is. And too often we end up, getting to the end of our lives or whatever, or having an injury such as yours. And all those opportunities are gone. And I know, like, for adversity, for me personally, adversity is kind of what has driven me over the last few years. I lost my sister in 2017 unexpectedly. In 2019, I was diagnosed with a cancerous tumor behind my eye.
Wow.
And it was one of those things. I always thought that stuff happened to everybody else,
Yep.
which is asinine in hindsight.
Right.
But I always thought, I'm like, okay, I'd always think about other people and be like, that I really feel bad for them. All these different things. Never, I don't know if it was out of arrogance or whatever the thing was. I just never thought that was going to be me.
Mm-hmm. But
it caused me to completely reevaluate, what am I waiting for to do this?
Right.
Yeah. And I firmly believe that I was given that as a wake-up call to realize that you can't work all the time.
Yep.
And it has been a complete game changer for me. But so what do you tell people then? You talk about like the gift of adversity for people that say, I haven't had that moment yet.
I've had a lot of people that say that. They're like, listen, I've been lucky enough to have sort of like a vanilla, existence. Went to high school, wasn't outstanding. Went to college, wasn't outstanding. Get a job, and it's sort of boring. They don't understand that the adversity that they're currently facing is the mediocrity of their life. That's their adversity. The fact that they are undriven, the fact that they have no urgency, the fact that there's nothing powerful enough to make them do anything. The amount of money that you have in the bank is just a number on a slip of paper or on a computer screen. The kind of car that you drive or the kind of clothes that you wear are not that important. So if you can take these lessons like what you talked about, how that gives you urgency, if you can ask yourself right now, if you woke up tomorrow paralyzed from the neck down, what do you wish you would have accomplished with your life? And if you actually pour into that thing and you're really honest about it, you will start to have an idea of what that is for you. So understand that adversity doesn't give a shit about your opinion. It shows up unannounced at the most inopportune time without apology. It couldn't care less about what you want, and it doesn't take no for an answer. So that's why I'm trying to tell people there is a lot of urgency that you have to have. And here's the other thing. If you don't go out and seek some sort of micro adversity, like smaller adversity every day, adversity will eventually find you. And when it shows up, it's not going to have the news that you need. So if you feel like you're not pushing yourself enough right now, you're right. There's a lot more that you can do. And just find something. It could be something like, I want to lose 10 pounds, or I want to gain 5 pounds of muscle, or I want to improve my Presidente time, whatever it is. But the idea is be very honest about what that is and have a metric for it. A metric is so important, but the other thing that's so important is a deadline. Without a deadline, time means nothing. So if you're telling yourself this year, after New Year's resolutions, I want to get in better shape, what the hell does that mean? I want to gain 5 pounds of muscle. Okay. How long does it take for us to do that? And then after we're in that place and we say, I want to do that, now that we had the steps and we had the metrics, now we say, how can I cut that time in half? So what that makes us do is really, no bullshit, figure out what it takes and then really push forward on those steps. And then you'll start to find out, because here's what happens. We try to avoid adversity, and then we realize that once we lean into it and we face it, one, it's not as difficult as we thought it was. And two, we are much more powerful than we believe. But the only thing that will help us get to that place is adversity spurring us forward. And that's why it's a gift, because it makes you elevate to a higher level. It never lets you do just enough to get by. Adversity knows your true potential even when you do not, which is why it kicks your ass when you give less than 100%.
So I want to go back just a little bit related to that. When you're in the hospital, at what point, because for those that don't know, you have fully recovered now.
Yeah.
So at what point do you start regaining some movement? And then, how does that progression go? And then I also want to, before I forget, I want to touch on, I've heard you say something in the past that your gratitude, the way you do like a gratitude thinking or gratitude journal is different than everybody else.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people, they show gratitude for the stuff that is very commonplace that happens every day. But I think, and I'm paraphrasing, but you said you got to find gratitude in the face of adversity. Like almost find the worst thing that happened to you that day.
Yeah. And
find out how can you be grateful for lessons learned there?
Yeah. Most people half-ass gratitude at best. When most people look at gratitude, they look at it almost the way a child looks at a Christmas list. And they find all the stuff in their life that's already good. And they say, oh, I have my family and I have my job and I have this and I'm on this podcast with Scott, right? So it's easy to be grateful for those things. You should be, obviously. But most of the time, they don't even really feel it. They don't really feel gratitude. They may write it down in a little journal or whatever. And that's okay to begin the process, but you have to truly feel gratitude. And the thing is, if you can find genuine gratitude when you're in the face of adversity, that's when it will help you, because now, no matter what happens in your life, you're bulletproof. When something good happens, it encourages you to continue that behavior. When something not so good happens, when adversity shows up, it helps you be more appreciative of the good things that you do have. So for me, I tell people when they're brushing their teeth at night, think about something that day that pissed them off, that they're still holding on to. And now that they're far enough removed away from it, where they can get genuine perspective, now look back and say, what can I be grateful for in that? And I'm not saying that it has to be, oh, well, that helped me see something from a different viewpoint. It does. But there are things that happen in life that are horrendous. So maybe the thing that we should be asking is, okay, this horrible thing has happened. It's continuing to happen. The gift from this adversity would be, why am I allowing myself to be in that situation? Why am I repeating this cycle over and over again? Knowledge that is acquired and unutilized is the equivalent of ignorance. So people think if I read enough books or I listen to enough podcasts or I buy enough of these products, that it will do the work for me. No. We have to do the work ourselves. It doesn't do me any good to have the best weapon system in the world with the most powerful ammunition. If I am not willing to load that weapon, squeeze the trigger appropriately, and know how to find my target, it doesn't matter. It's just an expensive, heavy paperweight at that point, right? So you have to be willing to take action consistently to make things happen.
Well, and I think people they justify not taking action by reading that one more book, listening to one more podcast, finding a little bit better diet than what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Because that's all easier than actually doing the work.
It is. And here's the thing. If you can hear us right now and you're not taking action on something and you're like, I'm not sure what to do. If I put a gun to your head, you probably know what you need to do. You probably know. If it's your business, you're like, I need to get more sales, but I don't want to make that phone call, or I don't want to do that email, or I don't want to hire a team to do it for me, then that's on you. You know what to do. You're just not doing it. And you're hoping that it's going to be easier somehow. In my TEDx, I say that by trying to avoid the struggle of adversity, not only will you have to face the same adversity already, but now you'll have to do so already fatigued from trying to avoid it in the first place. So if you know you have to do something, lean into it, get it done. Once you're done with it, it's not nearly as bad as you thought it would be. And when you look back on it in hindsight, it's really hard to find the gift of adversity when you're in the heat of battle. It really is. We often have to get away from it. We have to get through it. And for us as human beings, our goal is, as soon as we face adversity, we want to get as much distance between us and that thing as we can, because it's difficult, because it's hard, because it's painful. For me, when I was injured, I didn't have that luxury. So I had to sit there and lay with this wound. But if you can make your wound sacred, you will find so much within that, and you'll find so much about yourself, and you'll find a lot of stuff that you're not proud of. But that's what we are as humans. We're flawed, we're messed up, we're not perfect. But if we can begin that process and start looking at this stuff and unpack it, that's a huge opportunity for us to improve, to learn. And each of us individually, you were talking about how we justify things. I call it when people rationalize things, but I call them rational lies. They put this idea in their mind, and there's this thing that says, okay, well, I want to do this, but I'll do that tomorrow. That's a rational lie. That's a lie that you will accept because you know yourself better than anybody else. But the reality is, life doesn't really care about that. If we're going to do something, we have to do it now, or at least attempt to do it now. And it's just like anything else, like remodeling a house or building a business. It takes twice as long and costs twice as much of our metrics, whatever it is, whether it be money, whether it be time, whether it be energy. But it's not going to get done on its own. And if you don't begin to take action as soon as you can and be willing to fall down and face adversity over and over again, you're going to be in that same mediocrity, and you're going to die at 75, living the same life you did at 25, and have 50 years of just merely existing. And I hope that nobody has that.
That's powerful. So as you're starting your road to recovery, prior to that, I think I heard you say somewhere that you had contemplated suicide.
I was suicidal.
And you said it became like a harsh reality that you, and I by no means mean to make light of this or anyway, but you said you couldn't even accomplish that because
I was paralyzed.
Because you were paralyzed. And to me, that became like this very real thing of putting things in that perspective. So as you're on your road to recovery, at what point did you know that you had something to give back, that you were going to take your story and the lessons you had learned and turn that into like sort of a coaching or, like you're speaking?
For me, honestly, so I just laid there with it for a long time. I was very angry. And then I realized that this anger wasn't serving me, laying in the bed, paralyzed. And I was like, I can either play a victim for the rest of my life, or I can figure out how I can use this. If this is what my life is, how am I going to live it? And I'll be damned if I'm going to play a victim for the rest of my life. There's no way. What I ended up doing was finding out that the thing that I was overlooking, the thing that the adversity made me find, was that I didn't have genuine gratitude. And that's why I'm so powerful. So that's why I think gratitude is so important. And that's why I talk about the way that I do. I had to be grateful for everything from my parents' divorce to my own divorce. That forced me to start looking at those things my entire life. Once I had genuine gratitude, and the gratitude for me was that, okay, can I be grateful for being paralyzed right now? No, I want to kill myself. I can't even do that. But what I had to find was I took myself out of the equation. I was like, okay, if we'd have been in Afghanistan and I was leading a team and I got this injury then, and I believe this injury would have happened no matter where I was in the world, right? So if that's the case, if I'd have gone down in a red zone, that means for every one man that is injured, it takes two men to pull him to safety. So that means my team is compromised. That means another team has to cover down. That means another squad has to cover down. That means a helicopter has to fly into a hot zone to get me. So I was just grateful, genuinely grateful, that there weren't 50 other people whose lives were put in harm's way because of my injury. And that may sound kind of crazy, but when you're in a bed for months, you will think of anything to give you some form of hope. And that's why I was like, well, I'm not grateful that I'm injured, but I'm grateful that nobody else was hurt. And I was like, oh my God, I'm lucky. And I actually said it. And it's like it was somebody else saying it. Like, who the hell said that? But that was the beginning for me. And when I had that genuine gratitude, I became grateful for the bed that I may never leave, for the room that I may never get out of, for the people that were coming to take care of me, even though I was being not very nice to them. And that was the cornerstone. And then I just built on that. And once I had that genuine gratitude without any expectation, I started getting a little bit of feeling back in my left hand. And it wasn't a lot, but it was something. It took 1.5 years of physical therapy and occupational therapy to get me back to a place where I could actually get medically retired. I got out and I'm like, what do I do now? Robert Greene talks about this in his book, Mastery. He says, when you're not sure where to go, he's like, go back to the beginning. So for me, martial arts, firearms, this warrior kind of skill set, that's what I went back to. No job, no idea. I didn't want to write a book. I didn't want to speak, but I went back to doing martial arts. And a lot of my private students, I had one private student, real estate guy, lots of, he's in pretty good shape financially. And I would help him. We would train with the blade and different things. And we would go to lunch afterwards. And one of the lunches, he made a comment. And invariably, we would talk about something that we had just done in that actual skill for that martial art. And then we would apply it to what he was talking about in his business. And we gave him some aha moments. And at one point, he's like, you know what? I have a coach that I'm spending a lot of money on, and you're giving me more value than he is.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, well, just write me a check. I was being a smart ass. Well, most coaches have a 6-month or a 1-year commitment, and his time with this guy was about to come up. So he goes to the bathroom. Well, he doesn't go to the bathroom. He goes out to his car, gets his checkbook, writes me a check for 6 months of coaching, pushes it over to me at that rate that he was giving him. He's like, I don't want to insult you, but is this amount okay? And that was a lot of money to me. I was like, wow, yeah, that sounds fine. And he called his coach. He's like, hey, I'm not going to re-up with you. I found I'm going a different direction right now. And he said, how do you want to do this? And I was like, well, we can do it just the way we've been doing it. And then my story inspired him. He had me come talk to his people. He had a person that was in that tax bracket. He would refer me people in that tax bracket. All of a sudden I had, 3 clients that were paying that same rate. One of those guys had a speaking event. He says, can you come up and tell your story? I was like, yeah, but there's 200 people in the audience. I didn't know that's what they meant. But I just came up and told my story, spoke from the heart, and did a Q&A. They write me a check. I didn't know the speakers got paid. And I was like, I can't take that. I was like, you're the keynote speaker, idiot. Take it. And so other speaking events kind of happened from there. Now, it sounds very picturesque, like it just seemed like a fairy tale, but it took me, 40 some odd years of my life to get to that place.
Were you ever into any like personal development or like coaching prior to, when you entered the military at 38, or was this a brand new world for you?
So I love Stephen Pressfield. He wrote The War of Art. If you guys haven't got his book, you have to get that. I was lucky enough to interview him last year, and we got to talk about resistance and adversity. Like, it was amazing to me, right? And that book kind of saved me. Also, Robert Greene's books, the 48 Laws of Power, all of these things that he talks about. Here's the thing. I'd read Marcus Aurelius, obviously. I'd read Stoicism. I'd read Taoism. I'd read Zen. I'd read all these other incredible books. So I had this knowledge. But for most of us, it takes some sort of adversity to force us to put the stuff into play. And for me, it was like the most extreme case. So I had some of this knowledge, but when it came to coaching, again, I didn't know that people coach. When that guy wrote that check for me for 5 figures, I was like, people pay this amount for coaching. And that was just the norm. The same thing with even the book. I did another speaking engagement, and there was an older woman at the very back of the room, kind of pacing. So she wants to talk to me, but she wants to wait for me to leave. I talked to her, and she said, "I want to buy your book." "Ma'am, I don't have a book." And she's like, wags her finger at me like it's irresponsible for me to tell this story and not have a book. She had a granddaughter who was going through a divorce. She's like, "Listen, I would love for her to hear your story, but if you had a book, I could just give it to her." And it's like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And writing a book is a huge ordeal. And writing a book for me actually forced me to come to terms with a lot of this stuff because, again, once I was out of the military, it's like I tried to put all that stuff behind me. But I realize now that had that not happened, there's no way that you and I would be speaking. I would never been offered a TEDx. I never would have written the book. And then the coaching has taken off on its own because so many people understand, especially in the last few years. Like I've been beating this drum about adversity since 2017. And I spoke to a group via Zoom. There were a bunch of people on the call. And the COO was on there, and she's like, "Wow, you really timed this adversity thing well, didn't you?" And I was like, "Well, it's not like I just picked it up. This has been going on for a while." And she understood it, but she was thinking more about what was going on with the pandemic and everything. But the reality is adversity is everywhere, and it's coming for us. And you either choose to be a victor or a victim from it. You either take the adversity that you face, because we all get broken by it. It's what we do after we're broken that dictates who we are and what we become. So if you're afraid of adversity, that's fine. Go out and face it. These smaller ones, these micro adversities. And then just keep adding a little bit more to it all the time.
Well, and that's something I know, like I see it a lot in our industry, and even small town Midwest guy. When I first started hiring coaches, people be like, "What do they coach you on?" And I'd be like, I said, sometimes, it might be a business coach. It might be a life coach. And you'd get like those funny looks, or people be like, "And you pay for this?" Kind of like what you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I firmly believe that having that coaching ahead of having like the big adversity that happened to me later on gave me the ability and the tools to process it and navigate those times.
Yeah.
But I see, and I'm sure you see this, especially with your military background and everything, though, that I do think people question like what coaching is and why they would need it.
Right.
So like, what do you tell somebody that thinks I'm, maybe the lone wolf mantra of "I got this, I'm a man, I'll figure this out"? How do you explain to them like what your coaching can offer them?
Yeah, and we have to look at it like this. The best athletes in the world right now, whoever that is in your mind, they have a coach. They probably have 3 coaches, right? If you look at the most successful basketball, football player, whomever, they have a strength coach. There's a head coach. There's a technical coach, right? So they have coaches that are making them better. The lone wolf mentality is lots of times they don't understand they've already been coached by somebody, whether it be a confidant that's like helped them get better at their draw stroke, or they're looking online at YouTube to find a person that can give them a skill set to help them get better at it. So you're already looking for coaching. They just may not be aware of it. And understand that you can do a lot of it on your own. Let's say you can do it on your own and it takes you 5 years to do it. Great. Good for you. What if you hire a coach and they can help you do it in 6 months? Would that be worth it? Yeah. In my opinion, it is, because you're compressing that time. And a good coach, the reason why I'm able to coach the way I am is because I've taught martial arts for a long time. And so as a martial artist, I call you on your bullshit. Like if you're dropping your hand and you're throwing your punch, if I'm holding the mitts, I'm going to get you. I'm going to smack you. And that keeps you honest. So it's about maintaining this standard. And it's very hard for us to maintain the standard on our own for a lot of us until we have somebody externally. Have you ever seen a boxer that's dropping his hands in a fight? Here's a better one. You ever had a friend that's in a horrible, toxic relationship?
Yes.
That you can just see how horrible this is, but they can't see it. Why? Because they're in it. Because they're invested. Because there's emotion in there, and emotions assassinate the truth. So if we get stuck in this environment and we feel these things for this, or we have the sunk cost of, well, we're already been dating for 2 years, or we're already married, or we're already this, or we're already that, they don't have the wherewithal to pull themselves from that, even though it's obvious that it's going to fall apart, right? They're afraid to face that adversity that's inevitable, but they don't want to do it now. They'll do it tomorrow. So a coach is going to be that person that tells you, that holds the mirror up to you and is like, hey, listen, you're doing this. Hey, you're doing this. Hey, you're bowling whenever you bring the pistol up. No, I'm not. Okay. You show them a film of it and you see the hand come straight up. Yeah. This is not a good way to do a draw stroke. That keeps them very honest. And then if you have a good coach, they're going to find that thing that motivates you. They're going to find that thing in you that wants to be better. And a good coach is, you can yell at somebody, right? You can be in their face and that's okay. And there's a time for that. But if that's all I have as a coach, I don't have an additional gear, then I can't help that person.
And I think I've heard you say, and I never even thought about this before, but you maybe even attribute some of that back to being a bartender, having to read the room as soon as somebody comes in, because obviously you can't treat every patron that comes in the exact same way because everybody is dealing with something differently. And you said it taught you how to deal or instantly recognized what you were dealing with and how to approach them.
Yeah. As a bartender in Atlanta, I was often the bouncer as well. So I'd be at the point of the bar and I see somebody walk in and you see the way that they walk and what they're doing. They're looking around. Maybe they're looking for somebody. If it's a guy, maybe he's looking for girls. If it's a girl that's looking for one of her girlfriends, if he comes up and he has a swagger or if he's, adversarial or aggressive, this tells me that, yeah, in a couple of hours, I'm going to have to, take care of this guy. He's got this big affliction t-shirt on. Yeah, he's going to be a problem. But the thing is, body language is very important. That's why we're doing this the way that we are, so that we can get the best interview. We can be as present as we possibly can, so I can read what you're doing. I can know when you're speaking next. But that goes into everything that we do. So if you're talking to somebody and you're listening to them and you can tell that they're not paying attention, or again, there was literally a time where a guy in the bar looked at me, looked at his hand, made a fist. Like you could tell that he was literally trying to gauge how far I was from him before he tried to throw this punch at me. And he's drunk. So it's like, that was a huge advantage for me. But our intentions are very obvious. And if we can start seeing the intentions of other people, we can better understand our own intention with what we're doing. What's driving us? What's motivating us? What's pushing us forward? And if you don't do that, or if you're not aware of that, you're losing a huge advantage. And frankly, if you don't see it, somebody else is, right?
Well, and it's very hard to see that in ourselves.
It's so hard.
Even if we're aware of certain habits or whatever we have, it's at least for me, it's a completely different thing when somebody calls you out on it and
right.
you may have an idea that you do this or have this problem, but when somebody else can see it and they call you out on it, that stings.
It does. And a good coach will do it enough to where he gets you, now that he has your attention, and now say, what are we going to do with this? This is the third time that you've made this mistake technically. Why are we doing it? Are they tired? Have we done too many reps? Maybe that person needs to sit down, get some food, come back. Now they get back on the range, all of a sudden they're much better, right? For whatever the reason is. But sometimes, even as a coach now, like when I coach people that are very high level people, CEOs, leaders, those are people that are surrounded by yes men a lot of times. So nobody's going to tell them that their shit don't stink. Nobody's going to tell them that they dropped the ball on this. Nobody's going to tell them that they came off a certain way in that meeting. And that's what I do. I come in, I was like, listen, I'm going to coach you from a place of love and respect, but I'm going to kick you in the ass when you're not doing the work, and I'm going to call you on your BS. And the reality is that's what everybody needs. So if if you can keep your ego in check and not take anything personally, and just say, this is feedback to help me improve, then that's going to help you get better. But a lot of people, again, they aren't willing to do that. And more importantly, it's hard for them to hire somebody to stay on them all the time. But we're in the RTA syndicate, right? So Ed and Andy,
Yes.
they're very big on saying, listen, the reason why I'm so hard on you is because I know that you have more. And I know that if I am just trying to pat you on the butt and saying that's okay, that's not going to help you get there. They're going to push you. They're going to demand more from you. They're going to help you see that there's more there. And then eventually, when you get to that place, you can start kind of calling yourself out on it. You can hear that coach's voice in your mind telling you, man.
And at least something I found is, even if I'm not around that person or with that person, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't want to disappoint that coach.
Right.
So it does start to change your habits on a daily basis. Do you ever encounter some of the high-level CEOs that are surrounded by yes men that can't handle you being told or called out on some of their BS?
There's always going to be some part of it. And I make sure that it's a good fit, right? If I talk to somebody and let's say they have all the money in the world, so they're financially qualified, but then when I talk to them and I have a couple of questions to kind of probe them, and they're already making excuses and they're already justifying things, that may not be a good fit for me, because if they are not going to do the work and they're not willing to look at the inadequacies, I can't help them. But lots of them, when they hire me, once I'm there, I begin and we really start to see the areas that they want to improve on. But then we start to dig in and see the areas that they aren't aware of that need to be improved. As a matter of fact, they may say, I want these things over here, but until we work on this stuff here, they can't get there, right? So I always talk about it with, I call them circles or pillars. They may have this pillar where in business they're doing incredibly well, and they're at like the top, percentage of whatever that is. But then their relationship with their family, non-existent. Their physicality, they're overweight, they've got high blood pressure, they're pre-diabetic. When it comes to their own spirituality or like feeding in themselves, whether it be religion or just taking time to be present or just relax for a minute, they may not have that. So they think that the business metric is everything, but they don't understand that if this business stuff is here and everything else is down in the toilet, they can never get where they want to go. But if they're up here and now we bring these other things up, vicariously, everything else elevates with it. It ascends beyond where they're at. And a lot of people say, well, that's my edge. I had this drive. Well, I want you to know that the edge, it's a double-edged sword. So you may be cutting the edge on this one thing, but you may be cutting everything else in your life away from you. So that's what I do with that person is I get in there, make them feel uncomfortable, make them sit with it. And then once we start to see why they're uncomfortable, and here's the thing, once they start feeling it and understanding what's going on, they can see how that is just projected into the rest of their business. If there's some sort of like dysfunction in them or in their relationships or in their family, even as a kid, they're going to reproduce that in their business. So now they're always going to have tension with the CFO. They're always going to have tension with the salespeople. They're always going to have a problem with their co-founder, because to them, that's what the norm is. And I know that may sound kind of deep or more than what people realize, but that's what the reality is.
And that makes a lot of sense, even thinking about my own, situation, own business, everything.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. So I got so much I could talk to you about, but I don't want to keep you all day. So I have two more questions that I'd like to. What would you say to somebody that's facing adversity right now? We are in a crazy time for whatever people want to believe. There's a lot of people that are struggling that, I get people that sometimes tell me, I'm like, have you looked at it or have you tried coaching? And they kind of justify it saying, well, that's not for me, or that might work for you or them, but that doesn't work for me. What do you tell that person that's in the middle of adversity, trying to get them to see just a different way to approach things?
So you mentioned coaching specifically. So that person is like, well, coaching's not for me. That works for you. It doesn't work for me. Well, if you haven't had a coach, then how do you know? Right? All you're doing is projecting your fear of letting somebody else in to tell you where you're dropping the ball. Right? I have 2 coaches, in addition to having Ed and Andy as mentors that drive me. Right? They give us all the tactical and practical stuff in RT Syndicate, and then that incredible group of people in that community. The reality is, you're either going to start looking at these things and realize that you're just sick of it. You're sick of being mediocre. You're sick of being stuck where you are. You're sick of the same cycle over and over. You're sick of the artificial pacification and distractions of social media and, alcohol and empty relationships. And if you want to just allow that to continue, then by all means. But eventually something will happen in your life that will probably be some form of adversity to give you a gut check. And you have to decide now, do you want to do the work or do you want to wait? And it doesn't necessarily mean you even have to have a coach to do that. But it means you have to be honest enough to realize where you're at right now. You could be much further than what you're doing currently. And the reality is, until you embrace adversity, that is the catalyst that forces you to elevate to a higher level. It's the fire that we have to walk through to get stronger. If you're trying to lift weights, what are we doing? We're literally breaking that muscle down. We go to failure. We have to let that muscle get stronger. We have to give it that ability. If we're trying to do anything to get better, we have to be willing to go through that fire and understand that there's no easy way around this. Robert Frost says the best way out is through. And some people will try to circumvent as much as they can. But in the end, you eventually realize there's no shortcut. I have to do this. And the longer that you procrastinate, the longer that you're going to be on the side of mediocrity. Everything that you want in this life is on the other side of adversity, period. And the sooner that you accept that, the sooner you can start taking steps forward. Everybody says, I'm on this path, or I'm trying to find my path. Being lost on your path is part of the path. That's it. You are going to feel lost. You are going to feel not sure. But if you stop, that's where you will stay. If you keep walking, if you keep moving forward, eventually you will start to find these ideas. You see the direction from where you're at. And if you can figure out where you want to go, even if the path is not easily seen, if there's a path that is easily made for you, it's probably not yours. It's probably somebody else's.
That's phenomenal. And do you think that a lot of times people just need to, that instead of doing that deep dive to find out what that path might be, they just try to easily distract themselves with social media or saying, I don't have time. I don't, I always, a lot of people always say, and I'm probably guilty of it myself, I don't have time to do that. But then if we start auditing our day, well, I can tell you everything that happened in my Instagram feed. I can tell you what happened in this football game, whatever it might be. It's just a matter of making that time a priority for what I want to do. Because I think we all have time if we take action.
So when I hear a person that says I don't have time, what I actually hear them saying is, my happiness and success is not worth any amount of discomfort. They're willfully choosing this path because it's familiar. And people mistake familiarity with preference. You can hear a song on the radio. I know most people don't listen to radio anymore, but it used to be where they would just play a song over and over again, and they were paid to have it played so that people would become familiar with it. Even if you didn't like it, you could at least pick it out. And that familiarity is what gave it traction to be able to be successful. So if you're in a place where you're not willing to have even a little bit of discomfort, and here's the thing, in my TEDx, I say most of the problems that we have aren't even really problems, are just inconveniences at best. Anything that we do is difficult in the beginning. Anything. When you first start working out, you're sore. When you first start learning a new language, it feels very laborious. When you're first trying to clean up a house that's like completely a mess, it's going to feel like, man, I don't even know where to start. Just start. It doesn't matter. Just begin. Just do the work. Just get a momentum. Listen, action cures all anxiety. And the very definition of anxiety is choosing not to choose. So wherever you are, whatever's going on in your life, whatever you feel is this thing that you don't like about yourself, ask yourself this: in what way have I been complicit in this thing that I claim that I don't want? Own it. Figure out where you're letting it happen and stop letting it happen.
And it's one of those things that's very simple, but much harder for people to fully accept and do.
And it has to be simple though, right? Because when we're in the heat of adversity, we don't have the luxury of being philosophical. It has to be simple, yeah.
You know, you referenced Ed Milet, and one of his saying, I don't know if this is his saying or where it came from, but he always talks about complexity as the enemy of execution. And I was guilty of that for a long time, where I needed all the answers, and I would make it harder than it had to be. Mm-hmm. Where, as I've learned, I got a long ways to go, but as I learned just to take action, like you said, things start happening and then they start snowballing from there.
Yeah.
But for years, I would research, you know, to the point I could quote studies and all these different things, but I wasn't seeing the results and whatever it might be that I was trying to attain.
Right.
And looking back, I know exactly why now.
Yeah, because it's easier to do research than to actually do the work.
Yes. And who's going to fault somebody if they say they're learning?
Right. And it's hard to call somebody on their bullshit if they're not taking action, if they're just sitting there and talking about the hypotheticals.
So, well, this has been, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I think your story is amazing. And I encourage everybody to pick up your book, The Gift of Adversity, and check out your TEDx talk. I've sent that to multiple people. But one final question is, through your recovery, did the doctors ever say this is what happened, or did they ever give you any indication of how you recovered after the prognosis they gave you? Or do you think a lot of that had to do with and I know it may not have cured it, but a lot to do with like your mental mindset and approach to dealing with everything?
So I've had some doctors that say that obviously I was misdiagnosed, is what they would say. But there's a lot of research. Dr. Joe Dispenza has done a lot of research on this kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, Dr. Joe Dispenza was a professor at Life University in Atlanta when I was there. So he's kind of been on the cutting edge of this stuff. I believe that my mentality is what allowed me to recover. If you ask me about the specific mechanism of how that happened or what sort of plane or wave that happened, I don't know. I'm just very grateful that I have this chance. And here's the other thing. When I first started to recover and get a little bit of feeling back, I was arrogant. I had hubris. I was like, see, I knew I could do this. And the minute that I did that, I started sliding back. I went all the way back to stage at the very beginning, square one. And I went through that entire cycle again of anger, being pissed off. It's like, no, I'm going to come back to this gratitude. And eventually it helped me get to a place where now I am where I am. So I've never gone back away from gratitude. And that's why I'm so adamant about it. Again, everybody talks about gratitude, but they don't really feel it. If I love somebody, they know it, even if I don't say it. If somebody hates you and they don't say it, you can pick up on it, right? Body language, emotion, energy, all that stuff, right? So it's the same thing. If you're claiming that you're being grateful and you're writing it down, but in your mind you don't believe it, that's like, there is such a thing as toxic positivity. If you don't believe what you're doing, you're literally teaching yourself to lie to yourself. And now you will never follow through. You will never move forward on this thing consistently because subconsciously you're holding yourself back. It's like when businesses say, oh, we had this $100 million goal and they put it up on the wall. Well, those salespeople don't believe that. Maybe you should just say, listen, let's try to increase by 30%. That's more doable. They can believe in that. And that will allow them to actually commit 100%. Because if they don't believe that they can do it, or at least believe that there's a chance that they can do it, they won't take action. And that's why, again, most people when there's adversity, when it comes to their job, when it comes to work, when it comes to a relationship, when it comes to a difficult conversation, they won't face that adversity. It may be a 10-minute conversation that's really ugly, but if that could give you a lifetime of peace, it's not that hard. But for most of us, we don't want to do those kind of things. And that's why it's hard.
That's an incredible answer. And for like those people that are listening that don't know, you've not only recovered, but from what I hear, you're actually like, you're doing like major physical tests above and beyond like what just a normal person can even do. So you've recovered and then some. So like your mental approach to this is phenomenal.
It's, for me, the physical is the easiest realm for us to actually test ourselves, but I'm actually training my mind. It's just my body is the vessel. So I did David Goggins' 4x4x48 challenge in March last year. You run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours straight. And I was able to raise money to stop human trafficking at the same time. That's a win, right? I'll do that again this year. And then this year I'm going to the SEAL Fit. It's their 50-hour crucible. So
I had a friend that did that a few years back. He wanted to do it, I think, right when he was turning 40 or something.
There you go. And I'll be 50 when I go this year.
Well, good luck. He said he's glad he did it, but he said it was tougher than he anticipated. But he had no prior military experience to equate it to. He was just a civilian that wanted to challenge himself and got himself in phenomenal shape to go do it.
And the thing is, I know that, physical conditioning, for those of you that don't know, I'll do like 90-pound ruck marches still. I'll go for runs with 65 pounds on my back. And again, a lot of that is still to kind of test myself to see what are the limitations, what can I do. I did a mile of walking lunges Monday with my 25-pound plates on. So
does the thought of re-injuring yourself ever creep into your mind?
Absolutely. And that's what makes me stay very present when I'm doing all these things.
Okay.
So I have to be, the minute that I lose focus, that's when I'm going to get hurt. So that's why even in the face of adversity, you have to be present. Because if you're not present during adversity, you will miss the lesson. And that's when it catches you sideways and you get ambushed by it. It comes at you when you don't see it. The punch that knocks us out is the one that we don't see coming. And that's how we have to get there. But understanding that, I know that at that event, there's still going to be things that I'm not prepared for. Rich DeVinny wrote a book called The Attributes, and you saw him speak, right?
Yes. He was phenomenal.
Yeah, I was able to interview him. I was lucky enough to be able to interview him. And he makes that point. He says, listen, anybody can be a tough guy, but a person who's truly resilient has the capacity to adapt. That's what makes a person resilient. So instead of holding on to what this should have been and why this happened to me and I'm a good person and I'm a victim, no. Hey, listen, it is what it is. This has changed. The objective is gone. The intel that we got is wrong. Now what? The longer you hesitate, the longer you're going to be stuck there and you're not going to be able to move. And here's the other part. You can have all the information in the world and you can have the right answer. But if you apply that answer at the wrong time, it's still wrong. You've missed it. You've lost the opportunity. So if whatever it is that you're trying to work on, whatever is in your mind when you're listening to us right now, that thing that is you're avoiding, take a step today, right now, after this podcast, take a step to start getting that taken care of, whatever it is. Conversation, business, book a trip, book a training event, do something. Take that step. And what will happen is that will start to build momentum for you. But if you don't start to take any kind of action right now, you will be exactly where you were. And this year and every year from here on out will be exactly the same. And that's why when people have New Year's resolutions, I don't try to bag on it too much, but resolutions don't work because people make this idea that a resolution means that there was something that was unresolved in the year prior. You don't need a resolution. You need to be resolute. You need to figure out what's really important to you and then decide right now, I will single-handedly storm the gates of heaven or hell for this one thing. And once you have this one thing in mind, all these other subcategories, these sub-ideas, these smaller goals will come to you once you reverse engineer it. But a lot of people think I have to do all these things. No. If you're trying to be a better shot, if you're trying to go to a competition, if you're trying to be a better hunter, if you're trying to have a better communication, it comes from the reps, quality reps. In the martial arts, they say practice makes not perfect, it makes permanent. Only perfect practice gives us the potential of executing well in the heat of adversity. Because once that adrenaline dumps into your system, it's all out the door. You have to figure it out right now. And if you don't already have that skill set deeply ingrained in you, and this is another part of it, if you give up at the first sign of adversity, you are literally conditioning yourself to give up when you should be fighting the hardest. And that single decision will bleed over into everything else that you do in your life. It'll bleed over into your relationships, into your job. You cut your workout short. You won't even have the workout. You won't have an integrity or a standard. Arte, right? Arte syndicate. Arte actually means excellence. When you have that shirt on, when you go to these events, when you're on the call, you were literally thinking, this is about excellence. This is how I get better. It doesn't have to be this toxic idea of continuing to push. Sometimes the best thing to do for excellence is to actually pull back, to actually give yourself rest, to actually take your foot off the gas. But man, when it's time to do the work, you better get in there and you better attack that thing.
I couldn't have said that any better. I need to be better at that in my own life, but it's just so, like, for me, it resonates so much with what I've tried to do over the last 10 years through this path. I mean, for me, my wish is that everybody hears you speak here and, like you said, takes action on whatever it is that they've been waiting for before it's too late. You know, and I think I'll finish with something I've heard you say is, and I'll let you say because I'm not going to get it right, but something to the effect of we don't know what we have until it's gone.
Yeah,
but I think you said, I'll let you say it the way.
Yeah, they say you don't know what you got till it's gone, but that's not true. We know what we have, but we just assume that we will always have it. So for me, my physicality, I was an athletic person. It was easy for me. Martial arts stuff, I could pick up skill sets that other people were working for months at. I could just pick it up the first time. So I didn't respect it. People don't respect what they don't pay for in some capacity, whether it be monetarily, whether it be blood, sweat, and tears, whether it be doing the reps. So these things that you think that you're going to have forever, man, nothing's forever. Understand that now. And I'm not trying to make people scared or paranoid, but I am telling you that if you want to make it happen, if you actually think that what you're wanting to do is important to you, then you'll find a way. And if not, you'll find an excuse, period. Quit waiting, quit hesitating, and start acting now. Because only you are going to be able to do it. Nobody else can walk the path for you. Nobody else can do the work for you. And even if they did, again, you would not respect it. Earn it. Go get it.
I mean, this has been excellent. I can't thank you enough for this. Where's the best place people can find you so they can learn more about everything you have going on?
They can find me pretty much anywhere. If you're on social, Instagram, LinkedIn are my biggest platforms. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, I think, somewhere in there. You can go to marcusaureliusanderson.com to find out more about me, my coaching. You can just look up, you can go to YouTube and just put in the Gifts of Adversity TED, and mine will be the first one that comes up. If you enjoy books, The Gifts of Adversity, I put my heart and soul into that thing. I just bled onto the page. And if you're a person that enjoys audibles, I did an audible last year about it as well. So you can hear me reading my story to you. And then I put bonus content at the end of it too to give people some more information.
And I don't normally listen to Audible books, but I might have to, because listening to you speak, the way your passion and authenticity, energy comes out is really something neat to see. So that may be one Audible book I have to listen to.
Well, I appreciate it. I think you'd enjoy it, and I'd like to hear your feedback if you listen to it.
I will do that. Well, thank you again, Marcus. This has been amazing. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you for the opportunity, Scott.
Thank you.